Jack Parsons got me on the moon. Jack Parsons got me on the moon. Good evening, good day, good night. Salutations to all of you, wherever you are, and whatever you are, and welcome to another episode of The Velocity of Now with me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. I hope you're all keeping well. You enjoyed the last episode concerning the pathological, spiritually dangerous nature of the US-Mexican border. I hope it's given you pause for thought and exploring that as a topic yourself. And I'd be interested always in seeing your comments about this. There's already been some good ones, especially if you live along those borders or work along there. Now, I would also make a request at the beginning of this VoN, in that if you want to ask me questions that I can answer in other videos, let me know and I will do that. And about anything, once it's not personal or anything like that, but like anything to do with the myriad of topics I deal with and talk about. Now, today's episode, I'm dealing with the concept of soul loss. What is soul loss, and when signs of soul loss they show up in your life and you need to take action with your own consciousness and your own behavior in order to make sure that your soul isn't lost. Now, what soul loss is, it's a very misunderstood term. It's a belief that it only happens to people who involve themselves in devil worship and things like that. No, it's not only that. It shows up even in what they call, quote unquote, indigenous tribes. In the last video, I spoke about how the Comanche peoples in the US-American border were incomprehensibly sadistic and savage. And the average normie might say, well, that's because of colonialism, the Spanish and the Americans arriving, the white man arriving. No, they were like that for hundreds and hundreds of years before the white man showed up in America, just like the Aztecs were. And this was an entire group had lost its soul. Now all the New Agers are all like, going nuts right now, saying indigenous people losing their soul. They're the native savage. They were shamans in touch with their reality. They're spiritual beings. And the white man, no. Something had caused them to lose their souls as a tribe, as a group, as a people. Just like the modern people of the world in the West, so many of them lost their souls with the COVID, with the Rona, with the ping pong, with the foghorn leghorn, with the transubstantiation of the sacred needlecraft. People we thought were fine, decent people who would be understanding, they turned out to be monsters. The trauma, to some degree, encouraged them to lose their souls. But what really made it happen, what really made them lose their souls, was the power it gave them over others. They finally had a meaning and a purpose in their life to have power over others. So this is what may have happened to Comanches. It's so easy to say, oh, it was that Billy, you can't become it. Even when there's no video, Billy has to be a part of it. Good boy, sit down. There you go. You got a Billy bomb there, an audio one. But even the Comanches, they may have developed this soul loss as a group from their own kind of like Rona experience. Maybe it's like the scene at the beginning of the 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the proto-humanoid, after getting a bone of an animal and turning into a machine of destruction on another group of proto-humanoids, and steals their water hole and kills them, and also learns how to kill animals for meat. The proto-humanoid throws the bone up into the air, almost like in an exaltation of power, of dominance. And the next thing that you see, that fantastic and very deeply symbolic scene where it turns into a spaceship orbiting the Earth. We had to lose our soul to overcome, at some degree, to our native soul, to overcome fears of the night and the dark, in order to move as a society, and not necessarily a bad thing. The thing is, as you go through life, you will have these individual periods where your soul is in danger, and what you do is, like the human race has done through the development of things like philosophy and so on, and spirituality, and mythology and things like that, we develop a toolkit, psychic toolkits, to make sure that the soul loss doesn't happen when it shows up, or as we are progressing through history, life, and so on. Of course, during the Rona, you could have that image of the proto-humanoid throwing the bone into the air, turning into a Pfizer syringe, and that's what happened. That's what really happened. But so soul loss is something that we'll all encounter in our lives at some point. It can be brought about by trauma. It can be brought about by, just being a dick. It can be brought about by insecurity. Insecurity is a big one. Saying inappropriate things in social settings is often a sign of your soul. You better watch. You better be careful. We've all done this, where you might have tried to make a joke during the discussion of a serious topic, or you find yourself making the same stupid jokes over and over again. You will find that you're in danger, because that's not you really speaking. That's your daemon, your lower poles of cognition, your subconscious mind. That's the first to go. And so you got to catch yourself in situations like that. Things like, again, it can be brought about by trauma. Again, this is why we work. We have to. It's like that scene in The Godfather, where the senator or whatever he is, the American congressman, meets Michael Corleone and lectures him on how he doesn't like your type coming out to this God's land of Nevada and opening casinos in Las Vegas. He's saying Italian racist things, and Tony Corleone, Al Pacino, just says to him, "Well, we're part of the same hypocrisy. It's a very powerful. It's one of the most powerful scenes in a remarkably powerful and spiritual movie. Like all gangster, like most gangster movies, I think at some point I will do a VoN or something on the, or maybe even a film on the sort of spiritual nature of gangster films, because they're all about trying to survive in that world and maintain your soul. The very Shakespearean sort of, these things go right back to the classical Greek and Roman mystery plays and mystery theater, and it's very deep and powerful. They're not just films about fellas shooting each other up. They're much deeper than that. So anyway, we have to make sure we don't become part of the same hypocrisy as long as we understand that we're part of that same hypocrisy. You know, it takes two to tango. Yeah, so you've got to make sure you're not slipping into the pathology of the prevailing zeitgeist or social situation or family situation or friendship by issuing things like passive aggressiveness. That's one you have to be very careful about. You'll see a lot of like left wing types are very, and also religious holy rollers. So you get the American kind of like evangelical types tend to be very passive aggressive. You know, the ones from like the Midwest and stuff like that. And also, and not in a very bad way. And also, you know, this is another one. You can lose your soul through heavy weed smoking, particularly the green crack they have today. Watch the comments light up with all the fucking cannabis junkies now, but or heavy alcohol use. You know, everything in moderation. Both you know, chronic alcoholics and dry drunks, along as weed heads, they're notorious. It's really bad. Heavy stoners are notorious for passive aggressive comments. That's soul loss, encroaching upon them. Now, let's talk about what soul loss is. Now, I've read extensively and researched over the years into this, and the sort of simplest kind of like pulp fiction way, you know, in pulp fiction, they use a phrase to tell you a lot about a character without having to do a big descriptive sort of, you know, Joycean or Dostoevsky meandering psychoanalytical, you know, profile of the character in the book or play or whatever. It's just in the beauty of pulp fiction, right style of writing, is it that it compresses the personality of an individual into a specific scene. Like someone will ask them a question, and that will be kind of like demeaning, and they'll reply in such a way that it will show them to be a strong person in one or two words. Or the opposite could be that the pulp fiction story begins with an individual who's having a nervous breakdown, and it could be someone who has have stature in society, such as a police officer, a detective, or a scientist, or something like that, or even a soldier. And then we find, and then we say, well, okay, this begins with, this is a damaged person here. Now let's read the rest of the book and explore why, rather than you have the expiration. You have the expiration within traditional Western literature, the analytical profile of the character, and then they're described as being damaged. You know, like Anna Karenina is this classic example of that. The characters' neuroses and psychosis and mythologies are all resolved at the end of the novel. Whether it's the officer going to Serbia to fight in the war, or Anna Karenina herself, well, you haven't read the novel, throwing herself on the train, and so on. I'm going to give it in that style of the sort of like quick thing. To me, from what I gather from soul loss over the years, is that the subconscious mind, the daemon, or the psyche, or the lower poles of cognition, something has led it to become pathological and corrupt. It's starting to transform from a daemon into a demon. and it is shown on the surface by pathological behaviors that you will first notice yourself, but you'll try to suppress them. Then other people will notice them. And then if you have any sense, you will try to address them. But if you attach something to them, like a polemic, which I will talk about later, then the soul loss becomes a runaway train until in no time you have no soul, because you have replaced it or compensated it with something that's completely inappropriate. And so on a social level, that's the Comanche boiling alive and skinning alive other native groups in America, other First Nations, whatever they're called, whatever you want to call them. I don't like either one of those terms. In America, as well as, because they're not true, as well as the normies during the COVID, during the lockdowns and everything, the masking and all that. So, or people attracted to strong political ideologies where they're either, Bolshevik socialism or National Socialism, which are basically the same things who have converged on the different end of the circle. So a good place, that's what it would to be to me. The corruption and the damage of the lower poles of cognition, it becomes a disease of the personality, an old-fashioned term that's fallen out of fashion, which I think should come back in. And then as a result, the daemon becomes a demon, and you've lost your soul. Very difficult to get back. Now you have New Agers going on about you've lost your soul unless you do my 12-step course or attend my workshop or be with the quote-unquote shamans banging drums on the side of a hill in Glastonbury. That's none of that stuff. You won't get your soul back that way. In fact, you'll just be pushing it further away from yourself. If you have lost it, 99 times out of 100, you haven't lost your soul. That's just someone trying to capitalize on you having a problem in other ways of your life, trauma or something. So we go to Carl Jung. Again, you take Carl Jung's stuff on all this with a grain of salt. No, you don't take it with a grain of salt. You take it with a caveat or a proviso that Jung himself had issues as well. Often we addressed our issues through our work. The Rona Chronicles was me trying to deal with my fury and anger caused by the lockdowns. So, you'll always bring a piece of yourself into your work, and or a piece of your experiences. If you grew up in a dysfunctional home and you write books or make films about, the dysfunctionality of society, the pathology of society, you're bringing that into the world. This is art, isn't it? Doesn't mean you are those things. A lot of gangster stuff is written by gangsters who got out of, I'm talking about mafia stuff, who got out of that scene, and books by Hell's Angels and people like that. They witnessed murders. They didn't take part in them, but they may have witnessed these things, and then they write about it but they are kind of experts because they've dealt with this thing firsthand, like this kind of thing. Now, so you take Carl Jung's work in the same way. But having said that, he's an excellent source for so much stuff. But also remember that the Red Book itself was really it's a very strange, it's a fantastic read. In fact, I've got the non-illustrated version. A friend gave it to me years ago, and I'm glad I have the non-illustrated version, because if I had the illustrated version, all I'd be doing would be looking at the artwork. Remember, that book was hidden for over 50 years. It was hidden. The family were worried about releasing it because it was Jung basically showing him battling his demons. He was towards the end of his life. He was lying in his bed looking at a painting of this entity, this tulpa, this thing that he was sort of like seeing as a god or an angel or something, an entity. But that was probably his way of dealing with it. I don't know, but remember. The old expression, you don't get to be Pope by being a saint.